Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you, Sean. Just as a side note, I really enjoyed all the presentations today, and Ross, which is a great segue into what I'm about to talk about. It's a project that I've been involved with over the last couple of years at Loyola College, and it's about personalising learning for students. And this particular presentation, I want to focus on how we use ePortfolio, due work, and rubrics to do that. So what we decided to do is we were going to assess students at the beginning of semester on their learning challenges, their learning strengths, and their learning needs. And once we have that data, we would differentiate, once we have that data, we would aggregate that data to the class level so that every teacher would know as a snapshot, here are my students, here are their learning strengths, challenges and needs. And then the teachers would have an opportunity to look at their learning activities and see what possible differentiation they might want to introduce given the spectrum of students that they have in front of them. So that was the beginning of semester. Then they would engage in a project, and during the project we wanted to give students the opportunity to reflect on how far they've gone, how much work they still have to do, the challenges that they've had, how they might improve, and present that to another student or another two students, a pair or as a triad. So we call them positive partners, positive partners. And they would then get feedback from their peer on how they're going with that project. And that would be captured in a due work item. So they'd fill in a template, they'd submit that due work item, and that would go to the teacher. And then at the end of the project, they would do the same thing, only reflecting back. But importantly, at the end of the project, the teacher would mark a rubric, which we call a number of things. We called it learning agency. We might end up calling it learning engagement. You've called it learning behaviours. Traditionally, we've used what we call classroom learning indicators, which have still to this day are getting reported at the end of term or at the end of semester once. And really, as it's already been mentioned today, the horse has already bolted. It's a bit late to having that conversation. So what we want to do is do it at the end of every project, so you can have that conversation then and there, and in the context of continuous reporting, the parents can be involved. The self-assessment, it's called a personal learning backpack. I didn't invent that term. It came from the personal learning environment community out in the States. Personallearning.org, I believe, but they've now disbanded. So maybe I'm it, I don't know.
You're still holding the backpack.
I'm still holding the backpack. And it started off as a spreadsheet. So importantly, anyone who's interested, Universal Design for Learning, UDL, specifies that learning occurs at three places. One is when you're trying to access information. Second part is when you're trying to engage with the learning. And thirdly, when you're trying to express the mastery of your knowledge and skills. So what we've done is we've said, right, what are your strengths and interests in each of those three UDL categories? What are your challenges? What are your needs? And last year, Schoolbox created an ePortfolio-based survey for me that allows me to create a whole set of questions against each of those categories, to publish that survey onto ePortfolios, or publish it onto my ePortfolio, and then get students to do that survey. And can I just do a quick feature request?
Go for it.
Howard and Clancy.
On your custom.
is that we love using ePortfolio, and we love being able to create a template page and push that page out. But unfortunately, it can't push any content out with that page. So if I've attached my survey, my Year 7 survey to that ePortfolio, the Year 7 survey link won't follow the ePortfolio into, feature requests. And I can add and I can change those questions. So last year we tried it with the Excel spreadsheet. This year we're about to try it with this new survey, and I'm really excited to see how that goes. This is a template of what it might look like at the class level. So I'm a teacher, I've got my 20-odd students, and at a snapshot I'll be able to see a lot of information that might take me a whole semester to find out in some cases. So know your students and do that as soon as you can in the semester or in the year, so that you can then plan your activities appropriately. And I used an ePortfolio survey to generate that data to begin with, and all the reporting benefits that come with the Schoolbox survey I can then make use of. So I mentioned mid-project progress review. So if you're doing a project that will span, let's say, 10 lessons, 12 lessons across 3 or 4 weeks, what you want to be able to do is grab those students at least halfway through and give them an opportunity to reflect on how they've gone so far. This first section is what we used in science, humanities and religious education for the Year 7s last year. So students would fill that in, bring it to class with them, maybe with an artefact of what they created so far. And in the second section, their peers or peer would then review their work and say, well, I really like this, maybe you can improve that. And in the third section, the student would say, well, okay, I think I'm pretty good at these things, I might need to improve on those things. And they submit that as a due work item to the teacher. And the teacher, then that becomes an opportunity for the teacher to have a conversation with the student. So feedback, peer review, very important when it comes to personalising learning for students. This is the current version, version 3, and we're about to move into version 4. After a lot of blood, sweat and tears are going to be shed, mainly by me, I think. This is our version of what Ross might call the learning behaviour rubric. I called it the learning agency rubric. You can call it learning engagement rubric. So we looked at positive psych, we looked at PERMA-H, we looked at growth mindset, and we said, what are the main things that we want to be able to gauge? Okay, so put aside the assessment task. Let's focus on learning process. We need to foster competency in the learning process in our students so that they can apply that learning process to whatever they need to do in life, and they'll have the mechanics and the muscle memory, whatever, to be able to get through. So what are those things that we are looking for? You've got your pos psych things there. Problem-solving skills, computational thinking people are talking about. There's a few things you can put in there. And this one here, personal development, self-awareness, self-improvement. Some teachers look at the word zest and say, I can't deal with zest. How can you possibly gauge zest? I can't deal with that. And you can imagine I've had a lot of pushback from people on this. But you know what? It's got the conversation going. It's not about grades necessarily. It's about learning capacity, engagement in the learning. So we did a controversial thing. We said, well, how can we make this stick? Let's give it a mark 10%, maximum mark 10% out of the total project mark. And look, as you can imagine, we shouldn't be playing with grades, but this was a way to force the conversation. So here is what a typical rubric might look like. This particular fellow, I don't have the name there, but he got 80% overall for his project. And This rubric would have contributed a maximum of 10%, and it looks like he got roughly, 80-something percent, maybe 85%. So his mark would have gone up by maybe 0.83. But importantly, it forces the conversation. So we did surveys. Of course, we want data to be able to show, is this actually working? So we compared in our summative assessment, end of semester, classroom learning indicators. This is a separate set of indicators. Did you do your homework? Did you complete it on time? Were you engaged in class? Those sort of things. And we compared two subjects in which we did this PLE project against one subject that we didn't. And across three of the major indicators, there was an improvement in what you might call learning engagement or learning behaviour. So that was a positive result. We surveyed students, and not surprisingly, when you differentiate learning activities and you give students choice, and the holy grail is to actually give them the voice to be able to say, well, this is what I want to learn, but they actually like having that opportunity. No, I don't think there's any surprises there. The mid-project progress review, generally they liked learning off other kids, and certainly the comments that they provided show that they love learning off other kids. This one here was the main eye-opener for me, because we gave the same question to staff, and staff said, we're not really sure that kids actually looked at the rubric. This is what the kids said. Overwhelmingly, they looked at the rubric. We're not sure whether it's because it had the 10% on it. I doubt it. I think it's because it's there, in their face. The rubric is there, and I think what Ross was saying is a testament to that. I find that very affirming. Thank you. And also the fact that Schoolbox is venturing into, graduated rubrics or progression rubrics, and giving students the chance to self-reflect as a rubric is absolutely fantastic. I use the personal learning backpacks to better understand them as learners. So this is the staff. We had some staff who said, I'm not changing my teaching practice. You're going to get that. Mid-project review, sort of a mixed bag as far as the teachers were concerned. I had teachers who opted out and didn't do it at all. I sat in two classes when they did the mid-project review, and they were great. The kids were engaged, they loved showing each other, but it really does need teacher support to be able to push that through. Key findings. So the ePortfolio survey, which is the personal learning backpack, great for understanding your students, who they are. Differentiated learning, I'm preaching to the converted here. Obviously that's an essential part of pedagogy if you're going to personalise learning. Use your due work facility to provide formative assessment opportunities for your students as much as possible. The mid-project progress review took up a whole lesson, and there was resistance because it took up a whole lesson, because they lost another lesson because of the swimming carnival and because of whatever, and there's resistance to give up that amount of time. But there are smaller ways in which you can do formative assessment. Look up things like minute project, exit and entry tickets, little things that you can do along the way that give students an opportunity to self-reflect. And finally, the rubric that you're going to use to actually capture how are they engaging in the learning process, which I think is the critical ingredient here if you want to develop them as learners. The high achievers probably already have that down pat as innate as learners, but the ones that are average, below average, they really, really need this support. I think that's it. Yes. Any questions? Yes.
Just one question. Your rubrics, you've obviously made the choice to join the learning behaviours into the assessment, unlike the other example where they were separate rubrics.
Yeah.
I think your idea is that you want them to look at them in the context of that project.
That's right, yeah.
Would it be better if Schoolbox supported the ability to have two rubrics on an assessment, but perhaps one was for the assessment and one was for the learning behaviours?
I love you. I love you. Yes, absolutely. Because I think we're going to go down the track of let's not put a value as such on the rubric, on the learning behaviour rubric that impacts on the grade. Let's leave the grade separate, right? Don't touch the grade. But we do want to be able to capture that learning engagement experience.
One of the challenges I find with learning behaviours and putting them on the same assessment is that they're often to a different scale or level. And when you're talking about a progression rubric for assessment, your levels are very different to your learning behaviour levels. And so that then suggests to me is they're actually two separate rubrics.
They are separate rubrics, yeah.
But you've managed to merge them into one.
I managed to merge them into one, well, you're damned I'd rather fail trying than succeed at doing nothing.
Yeah, but if you had the opportunity to have two rubrics, that would also be a good solution.
Yeah.
We've got people that have just made them so they've got the same progression.
The same levels for the learning behaviours.
They're not integrated yet.
Yeah.
But they're looking at starting that. So.
Anything else?
Thank you so much.
Okay, no worries. Thank you.